I still remember the exact smell of that night. Hot dust, old oil, and something sour that came from standing water trapped in cracks of the concrete. It was the night I took a random delivery job because I needed the extra money. Nothing about it felt strange at first. Just another warehouse on the edge of town, the kind that sits near the highway and looks half forgotten even during the day. I had been there once before, years back, and it seemed harmless then. Big metal doors, long rows of storage units, yellow lights that buzzed like tired insects. I arrived a little after midnight. The place was quiet in a way that felt heavier than normal quiet. No traffic noise, no wind, no distant city hum. Just silence sitting on my shoulders. I parked near the office building, shut the engine off, and listened to the ticking sound as the car cooled down. My phone showed low signal, one thin bar that faded in and out. The job was simple. Drop a sealed box inside Unit C17, no contact needed. The client said the unit was unlocked. It grabbed the box from the trunk. It was heavier than I expected, not impossibly heavy, but dense. The cardboard felt slightly damp, like it had been stored somewhere cold. I didn't think much of it. Warehouses are full of strange things. I walked past rows of metal doors, each one numbered in faded paint. The lights overhead flickered now and then, not fully going out, just enough to make shadows jump. My footsteps echoed too loudly, like the space was empty but listening. I could hear my own breathing, slow and steady at first. Unit C17 was far back, almost at the end of the row. As I got closer, the air felt cooler. I noticed the floor had dark stains, old oil spills, or maybe water damage. The unit door was half open, just like I was told. I stepped inside and placed the box near the back wall. The inside smelled like metal and mold. I turned around to leave. That's when I realized the door behind me had moved. It wasn't closed, not fully, but it was lower than it was before. Just a few inches, but enough that the gap of light was smaller. I stood still and listened. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear anything at all. I walked forward and lifted the door back up. The metal was cold against my palms. It scraped loudly, the sound bouncing down the hallway. I stepped out and let it rest where it was before. I told myself it was just air pressure, maybe a bad hinge. I started walking back toward my car. Halfway down the row, I felt it. That feeling you get when something is wrong but you don't know why yet. My skin tightened. The back of my neck felt exposed. I slowed my steps and listened again. Somewhere behind me, far down the row, there was a soft dragging sound. Slow, uneven, like something heavy being pulled across concrete. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I waited, counting seconds in my head. 10, 20. My heart started beating harder, not fast, just heavy. I told myself it was another worker, maybe a night guard doing rounds. I started walking again, faster this time. The dragging sound came back, closer. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see whatever it was. I kept walking, trying not to run, because running makes noise and panic makes mistakes. The lights overhead flickered again, and one of them went out completely, leaving a dark patch I had to walk through. When I stepped into that darkness, the sound behind me changed. It wasn't dragging anymore. It sounded like slow footsteps. I broke into a run. My footsteps echoed wildly now, loud and sharp. The sound behind me sped up too. Still no words, no shouting, just movement. That made it worse. Whoever was back there didn't need to speak. They knew I could hear them. I reached the corner where the rows turned, expecting to see the open lot and my car. Instead, the path was blocked. A large metal gate was pulled down halfway, low enough that I couldn't run under it without slowing down. I dropped to the ground and slid under it, scraping my arms and chest. The concrete burned my skin. I rolled to the other side and stood up, breathing hard. The sound stopped again. I stood there shaking, listening so hard my ears hurt. Nothing. No footsteps, no dragging. Just my own breath, loud and uneven. I looked back at the gate. It was still halfway down, like someone had left it that way on purpose. I didn't go back the way I came. I moved between the rows on the other side, trying to find another exit. The place felt bigger now, like it had stretched. The rows all looked the same. The numbers on the units were harder to see in the low light. My phone screen lit up when I checked it, but there was no signal at all now. Just an empty bar and the time blinking at the top.
As I walked, I noticed things I hadn't before. Some unit doors had dents, deep ones, like they had been hit over and over. One door had long scratch marks near the bottom, uneven and ugly. I didn't want to think about what made them. I heard the sound again. This time it came from the side, not behind me. Slow footsteps, steady, not rushed. Whoever it was knew the layout. They knew where I was going before I did.
I ducked into an open unit and pulled the door down just enough to hide the light from outside. I crouched behind a stack of old pellets.
My knees pressed into the concrete. My hands were shaking so bad I had to grip my wrists to stop them. The footsteps passed by, close. So close that I could see a shadow slide under the door, stretching across the floor. The shadow paused. I stopped breathing. My chest burned, but I stayed still. The shadow moved on. I waited a long time after that. My legs went numb. My mouth felt dry and thick. When I finally lifted the door again, the hallway was empty. The lights buzzed softly. Nothing else moved. I didn't try to be quiet anymore. I moved fast, checking every corner before turning. I finally saw the office building in the distance. The glass door reflected the yellow lights, making it look like a dark mirror. My car was parked just beyond it. Seeing it made my chest tighten with relief. As I crossed the open space, I heard the sound again. This time it wasn't footsteps. It was metal scraping against metal, a storage door being lifted. I didn't look back. I ran straight for my car, unlocked it, and threw myself inside. My hands fumbled with the keys.
For a moment, nothing happened. Then the engine turned over and came to life.
I slammed the door shut and locked it. In the rearview mirror, I saw movement between the rows. A shape stepped into the light for just a second. I couldn't make out details.
Just a person-sized shape, standing still, watching. No wave. No rush, just waiting. I drove out of there so fast the tires squealed.
I didn't slow down until I hit the highway.
My whole body shook the entire drive home. The next day, I reported the incident to the company that hired me. They said the warehouse was unmanned at night and had no guards on duty. They also told me Unit C-17 had been empty for months. No scheduled deliveries. No records. A week later, I checked the news. There was a short article about a man arrested near that same warehouse. He had been living inside empty units, moving through the property at night, using the maze of rows to avoid cameras. Tools were found with him. Heavy ones. The article mentioned damage to doors and complaints about noises, but nothing else. I stopped doing night deliveries after that. I still drive past that highway sometimes during the day. The warehouse looks smaller in the sunlight, less threatening, but I know better now. I know how big it feels at night. I know how quiet it can get. And I know that some places don't need anything unreal to be terrifying. Sometimes all it takes is another person, patience, and a place where no one is supposed to be watching. I was working the night shift at a self-storage place on the edge of town. It was one of those jobs you take because it pays a little extra and nobody wants it. The place sat between an empty field and a closed factory, far from houses, far from streetlights. At night, the whole area felt cut off from the rest of the world. The road out front barely had traffic, and when cars did pass, the sound faded fast and left everything quiet again. The storage place had long rows of metal units, all painted the same dull gray. They stretched back in straight lines, like narrow streets with no life in them. Each unit had a rolling door with a lock. During the day, people came and went, dragging boxes, slamming doors, arguing with broken locks. At night, it was just me, the office, and the units. The office was a small building near the gate with a desk, a chair, a coffee machine, and a few security screens that showed camera feeds. Most of the cameras barely worked. The screens flickered, froze, or showed grainy pictures that were hard to trust. My job was simple. I sat in the office, watched the screens, did paperwork, and every hour I walked the property to check for broken locks or open doors. Nothing ever happened. Most nights felt long and boring. I would listen to the hum of the old fridge, the buzz of the lights, and the distant sound of insects outside. That night started the same way. It was late summer, and the air was thick even after dark. Sweat stuck my shirt to my back. The office smelled like old coffee and dust. Around midnight, a storm rolled in. I could hear thunder far away, low and slow. The wind picked up and rattled the loose sign near the gate. Rain started to fall, light at first, then harder, drumming on the metal roofs of the units. The sound echoed through the rows and made everything louder and sharper. I watched the cameras as rain streaked across the lenses. Shadows moved when the wind pushed weeds against the fences. Everything looked normal, but the storm made it harder to see. Around 1 a.m, one of the screens went black. That happened sometimes, so I wrote it down and kept watching the others. When it was time for my walk, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The rain had slowed, but the ground was wet and smelled like metal and dirt. The lights over the rows flickered. The place felt different in the rain, smaller and more closed in. The sound of my boots on the wet concrete echoed back at me. I walked slowly, shining the light on locks and doors. Everything was closed. Everything looked fine. Halfway down the third row, I noticed something that made me stop. One unit had a lock on it, but the door above it was bent inward, just enough to leave a thin, dark gap at the bottom. It looked like someone had tried to force it open and failed, or maybe forced it open and bent it back into place. I crouched and shined the light into the gap. I could see the edge of boxes and what looked like a rolled-up mattress. That was not strange by itself. People stored all kinds of things. What bothered me was the smell. It was faint but clear, a mix of sweat, old food, and something sour. It smelled like someone had been there recently. I stood up and felt a tight feeling in my chest. The rules were clear. If a unit looked damaged, I had to report it and leave it alone. I backed away and made a note to call it in at the end of my shift. As I turned to leave, I heard a sound behind me. It was soft, like fabric brushing against metal. I froze and listened. The sound stopped. I told myself it was just the wind or rainwater dripping. I finished the rest of my walk faster than usual and went back to the office. I locked the door behind me and sat down, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. I watched the screens again. The broken camera stayed black. The others showed empty rows shining under wet lights. Around 2 a.m, the power flickered. The lights dimmed, then came back. The coffee machine beeped and shut off. The fridge went quiet for a moment, then hummed again. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. I checked the screens. One of them showed movement at the far end of the property. The picture was blurry, but I could see a shape crossing between units. I leaned closer to the screen. The shape moved slow and low, like someone trying not to be seen. It disappeared behind a row and did not come back out. I watched the screen for a long time. Nothing else moved. I told myself it could be a shadow or a glitch, but the shape had been too steady, too solid. I did not want to go back outside, but I could not ignore it. I took the flashlight again and stepped out. The rain had stopped, but water dripped from the roofs. The air felt heavy and still. I walked towards the area where I saw the movement. Every sound felt louder now. My breathing, my footsteps, the faint drip of water. As I turned down the row, I saw it right away. Another unit door was slightly open, just a few inches. The lock hung looser, not broken, just unlocked. The light inside the unit was off, but the gap looked darker than the rest of the shadows around it. I stood there, staring at it, trying to decide what to do. Then I saw the marks on the ground. Wet footprints led from the open unit toward the fence at the back of the property. They were barefoot, they were fresh. My stomach dropped. I felt cold despite the heat. I did not follow the prints. I backed away slowly and returned to the office as fast as I could without running. I locked the door again and checked the screens. The camera covering the back fence was the one that had gone black earlier. I stayed in the chair and did not move. Minutes passed. Then I heard a sound outside the office. A slow dragging sound, like something being pulled across concrete. It stopped near the door. I held my breath and stared at the handle. Nothing happened. The sound started again, moving away this time, fading into the rows. I stayed there until the sky outside began to lighten. Dawn came slow, turning the gray metal units pale and dull. When my shift ended, I did not do another walk. I called the manager and reported everything. Later that day, police came and searched the property. They found bedding, food wrappers, bottles and clothes inside several units.
Someone had been living there, moving between units, cutting cameras, waiting for night. They never found the person. All this and parkour.
I quit that job the same day. Even now, when I drive past storage places at night, I think about those long rows of metal doors. I think about how many places there are where someone can hide in plain sight. I think about the sounds I heard in the dark and how close that person had been while I sat alone, thinking I was safe behind a desk and a screen. I was doing inventory checks for a small logistics company, the kind of boring work nobody else wanted. The job paid a little extra if you agreed to do late hours, so I took it. That night, I was sent to a storage yard on the edge of town, far from houses and streetlights. It was one of those places people forget exists, sitting behind old factories and empty lots. The sky was dark but clear, and the air smelled like metal and dust. The gate creaked when I pushed it open. The sound felt too loud in the quiet, like it carried farther than it should. Inside, rows of storage containers stretched out in straight lines. They were stacked too high in some places, rusted and dented, with faded numbers painted on the doors. My task was simple on paper. Walk through each row, scan the container numbers, check the locks, and mark any damage. I had a flashlight, a clipboard, and my phone with a weak signal that kept dropping in and out. The yard lights were spaced far apart, and many of them were dead. Large areas were lit only by my flashlight. Every step echoed off the steel vaults, my boots crunching on gravel. I could hear the wind moving through gaps between containers, making low sounds that reminded me of breathing. I told myself it was just the wind and kept walking. As I moved deeper into the yard, the sense of isolation grew heavier. I realized I could no longer see the gate. The rows looked the same in every direction, and I had to double-check the numbers to make sure I was in the right place. My flashlight beam picked up scratches on the metal doors, some deep, some shallow, like someone had dragged tools across them. I noticed one lock hanging open, swinging slowly. According to my list, it was supposed to be sealed. I wrote it down and shined my light inside. The container was mostly empty, except for old wooden pallets and torn plastic wrap. The air inside smelled damp, like mold and oil. I stepped back and closed the door, making sure it latched. That was when I noticed something else. There were footprints in the dust near the entrance. They looked fresh, not blurred by wind or time. They were larger than mine. I paused and listened. The yard was quiet again, too quiet. No cars, no distant city noise, nothing but the faint hum of power lines somewhere beyond the fence. I told myself it could be from earlier workers, maybe someone forgot to log a visit. Still, my chest felt tight, and I kept my flashlight raised as I walked on. A few rows later, I heard a sound that was not the wind. It was a soft scrape, like metal rubbing against metal. It came from behind me. I turned quickly, sweeping my light across the containers. The beam caught nothing but rust and shadows. I stood still, holding my breath, waiting. The sound did not repeat, but the feeling that I was not alone did not go away. I tried to speed up without running. The gravel shifted under my feet, and every step felt louder than before. I checked more containers, marking numbers, forcing myself to focus on the task. My hands were sweating, making the clipboard slippery. I wiped them on my jacket and kept going. At the far end of the yard, near a cluster of containers stacked 3 high, I found another open lock. This one was bent, like it had been forced. The door was slightly open. I did not want to look inside, but I knew I had to document it. I shined my flashlight through the gap. Inside, I saw more than pallets. There were blankets on the floor, empty bottles, and food wrappers. Someone had been staying there. The blankets were still rumpled, as if recently used. The air felt warmer inside than outside. I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. That was when I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching on gravel, coming from somewhere to my left. I turned my light in that direction, but the beam did not reach far enough. The steps stopped. I stood frozen, afraid that if I moved, the sound would start again. My mind raced, trying to think of a safe way out. I was deep in the yard, surrounded by metal walls that blocked sound and sight.
I started walking backward, keeping my light aimed ahead of me. The footsteps started again, closer this time. Whoever it was did not try to hide the sound anymore. The steps followed my pace, stopping when I stopped, moving when I moved. The message was clear without words. I turned and ran. I did not care about noise or paperwork anymore. I ran down the narrow path between containers, my flashlight bouncing wildly. The shadows jumped and twisted, making it hard to see where I was going. I took a wrong turn and ended up in a dead end, a tall stack of containers blocking my path. I spun around just as the footsteps reached the corner.
My flashlight beam caught a shape moving into the row. I did not see a face clearly, only a tall figure wearing dark clothes, moving with confidence. The light shook so badly I could barely keep it aimed. I backed up until my shoulders hit cold metal. The figure stopped a short distance away. They did not rush or speak. I felt trapped, my breathing fast and shallow. They just stood there as if waiting. My phone was in my pocket, but I knew there was no signal here. Even if there was, I could not afford to look away. I spotted a narrow gap between two containers to my right, just wide enough to squeeze through. I moved without thinking, turning sideways and forcing myself into the gap. The metal scraped my jacket and arms as I pushed through. I heard movement behind me faster now. I stumbled out into another row and ran again. My lungs burned and my legs felt weak, but fear kept me moving. I followed the numbers painted on the containers, hoping they would lead me back toward the gate. The yard lights flickered overhead, some turning on, others staying dark. The footsteps followed, sometimes close, sometimes farther away, but never gone. I could hear breathing now, not mine. It was steady, controlled. Whoever was chasing me was not tired. I finally saw the gate in the distance, a dark outline against the night sky. It felt unreal, like it might disappear if I blinked. I ran harder, my boots slipping on loose gravel. My chest hurt and my vision narrowed, but I did not slow down. Just before I reached the gate, I tripped and fell hard. The flashlight flew from my hand, skidding across the ground and spinning to a stop, its beam pointing back into the yard. I scrambled to my knees, turning to see if the figure was close. The light showed the empty row behind me. No movement, no footsteps, nothing. I did not wait to understand. I got up and shoved the gate open, nearly tearing my shoulder. I ran out into the open lot and did not stop until I reached my car. My hands shook so badly it took several tries to unlock the door. I jumped inside and locked it, breathing hard, staring back at the yard. From the safety of the car, the place looked quiet and still, just rows of containers and broken lights. There was no sign of anyone moving. No shadows. No sound. I sat there for a long time, waiting for my heart to slow down. Eventually, I drove away and went straight home. I reported the open containers and said I could not finish the check. I did not mention the footsteps or the chase. I knew how it would sound. The next day, I quit that job. Weeks later, I read a short news article about the storage yard. Police had arrested a man living there illegally, hiding among the containers. He had a history of assault and had been avoiding warrants. They said he had been watching workers at night, waiting for chances to steal or worse. I never went back to that area. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about the sound of those footsteps on gravel, steady and patient. What scares me the most is not that someone was there. It is how calm they sounded, like they knew the yard better than I ever did, and like they were never in a hurry at all. I was driving home from a night shift I had picked up last minute, the kind of shift you only accept because you need the money and tell yourself you will deal with the tiredness later. It was close to 3:30 in the morning. The roads were almost empty, the kind of empty that feels wrong instead of peaceful. Street lights passed one by one, washing the inside of my car in dull orange light and then dropping me back into darkness. I had the window cracked because the air inside felt stale, and the cold outside helped keep me awake. My eyes burned, my shoulders were stiff, and my head felt heavy, like it was filled with wet sand. About 20 minutes into the drive, I realized I was lower on fuel than I thought. The gauge needle was sitting just above empty, and the warning light had been on for a while. I told myself I could make it home, but then I remembered a stretch of road ahead that had no stations for miles. I didn't want to risk getting stranded that late, so when I saw a small sign for a gas station coming up, I took the exit without thinking much about it. The exit led to a narrow service road surrounded by trees. Not thick forest, just long lines of trees that looked darker than everything else around them. The station was old. I could tell that even before I pulled in. The lights were on, but they were dim and flickered slightly, like they were struggling to stay alive. The building itself looked tired. The paint was peeling, the windows were smudged, and one of the pumps was wrapped in yellow tape like it had been broken for years. I parked near one of the working pumps and shut off the engine. The silence hit me right away. No traffic sounds, no wind, no insects, just the faint hum of the lights above me. I stepped out of the car, stretched my back, and started pumping gas. The handle felt greasy, like it hadn't been cleaned in a long time. I tried not to think about that. As the tank filled, I looked around without meaning to. The store door was closed and the inside lights were off, which I found strange for a station that was supposed to be open. There was a small handwritten sign taped to the glass, but I couldn't read it from where I was standing. Behind the building, the trees seemed closer than they should have been, pressing in on the place. It felt like the station was shrinking under their weight. Halfway through filling the tank, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were tire marks in the dirt near the edge of the lot, deep and uneven, like someone had spun their wheels hard. They didn't lead neatly back to the road. They curved off toward the trees and disappeared into the darkness. I told myself it was probably someone messing around, maybe a truck turning too sharply. Still, I kept staring at them longer than I should have. When the pump clicked off, the sound was loud in the quiet. I jumped a little, annoyed at myself. I replaced the handle and went to get back in my car, but that's when I noticed my driver's side door was slightly open. I was sure I had closed it. I stood there for a moment, staring at the gap, my heart beating faster than it needed to. I told myself I must have not shut it all the way. Being tired messes with your memory. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a few seconds, just breathing. That's when I smelled it. Something sour and heavy, like old sweat mixed with dirt. It wasn't the usual car smell. It was new. My chest tightened, and I checked the back seat and the floor quickly. Nothing. No one. Nothing out of place. The smell slowly faded, or maybe I just got used to it. I started the car, but before I could put it in drive, I noticed movement near the edge of the station lights, near the trees. At first, I thought it was my eyes adjusting, but then I saw it again. A shape shifting slightly, low to the ground, then still. I stared hard, my heart pounding. The light didn't reach far enough to show details, just darkness swallowing whatever was there. I pulled out of the station fast, tires crunching on gravel, and merged back onto the road. I didn't look in the mirrors more than I had to. I kept telling myself I was just tired, that my brain was filling in gaps with nonsense. That worked for about 5 minutes. Then I noticed headlights behind me. At first, I was relieved. Another car meant I wasn't alone, but the relief didn't last. The headlights stayed far back, not getting closer, not falling behind, just there. I sped up a little. They sped up too. I slowed down. They matched my speed perfectly. No passing, no backing off. My mouth went dry. I checked the mirrors again and again. The road was straight, no turns, no places to hide, just trees on both sides and darkness beyond them. The headlights never wavered. After a while, I tried to convince myself it was just coincidence, someone else heading the same way. But then they flashed their high beams once, just once, not enough to be a mistake. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, my palms slick with sweat. I sped up more, pushing past the speed limit. The engine whined in protest. The headlights behind me stayed exactly the same distance away. My chest felt tight, and my breathing became shallow. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but the signal out there was weak. My phone showed 1 bar, then none. The road curved sharply to the left, and for a moment, the headlights disappeared. I felt a rush of relief that made me almost laugh. Then they came back into view, closer this time, much closer. I could see the outline of the vehicle now. A large SUV, dark, with no visible license plate. I tried to remember if I had noticed that car at the gas station. I couldn't. My memory felt slippery, unreliable. Up ahead, I saw a turnoff, a narrow road that led toward a residential area according to a small sign. I took it without slowing down, tires squealing slightly. The road was darker, narrower, and lined with tall hedges instead of trees. Houses were spread far apart, most of them dark. The headlights followed. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might burst.
I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I just knew I couldn't stop. He made another turn, then another, driving deeper into the neighborhood. The roads twisted and looped, clearly not designed for easy navigation. The headlights never left. At one point, I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw something that made my stomach drop. The driver's side window of the SUV was down. I couldn't see the driver's face, just a dark shape leaning slightly toward the opening, like they were watching me closely. I turned again, harder this time, and suddenly my headlights caught a dead end. A tall fence blocked the road completely. I slammed on the brakes, heart in my throat. For a split second, I thought it was over. Then I heard the sound of tires stopping behind me. I sat there, frozen, hands locked on the wheel, breath shallow and fast. I didn't turn around. I didn't move. Seconds stretched into something that felt endless. I expected footsteps. I expected a door to open.
None of that happened. After what felt like minutes, I risked a glance in the mirror.
The SUV was gone. The road behind me was empty, silent, no headlights, no engine sound. Just the faint buzz of a nearby streetlight. I sat there for a long time before I could move. When I finally did, I carefully turned the car around and drove slowly back the way I came, checking every mirror, every shadow. I didn't see the SUV again. I made it home just as the sky started to lighten with early morning gray. I didn't sleep that day. I kept replaying everything in my head, looking for logic, for a normal explanation. Maybe it was someone messing with me. Maybe it was road rage. Maybe I imagined parts of it because I was exhausted. But weeks later, I drove past that same exit in daylight. The gas station was closed, boarded up, with a large sign posted by the road saying it had been shut down after multiple incidents involving missing persons along that stretch of highway. The date on the notice showed it had been closed for months before the night I stopped there. I still don't know where I actually got gas that night. I don't know what followed me, or why it let me go. All I know is that I never let my tank drop below half anymore, and I never take unfamiliar exits in the dark, no matter how tired I am. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what you see clearly, it's what happens when everything feels just slightly wrong and you realize too late that you walked straight into it.
I woke up at 2:13 a.m. without knowing why. The room was quiet in that deep way that only exists after midnight, when even the outside noise seems to hold its breath. My phone screen glowed beside my pillow, lighting up the ceiling for a second before going dark again. I remember feeling that strange mix of tired and alert, like my body wanted sleep but my head didn't trust it. I lay there staring at the wall, listening to the low hum of electricity in the apartment, the fridge cycling on and off somewhere behind the kitchen wall. I lived alone on the 4th floor of an old building that had been renovated too many times. The walls were thin, the pipes knocked randomly, and the floor always creaked even when no one was walking. I was used to it. That night felt different though. The air felt heavy, like it was holding heat even though it was winter. I turned onto my side and noticed something small but wrong. My bedroom door was open. I always closed it before sleeping. Always. It was a habit I picked up years ago, one of those pointless routines that make you feel safe. The door being open wasn't dramatic. It was only open a few inches, just enough for the hallway light to spill across the floor in a thin yellow line. I told myself I must have forgotten, but my chest tightened anyway. I stayed still, listening. The building wasn't completely silent anymore. Somewhere above me, water ran briefly, then stopped. From outside, a distant car passed. Everything sounded normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already happened while I was asleep. I slowly sat up in bed, careful not to move too fast, as if sudden motion would somehow make things worse. I stood and walked to the door. The carpet was cold under my feet. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and looked into the hallway. The lights were on like I'd left them earlier, the small table by the wall untouched, my shoes still lined up neatly. Nothing was there. I checked the bathroom, empty. I checked the kitchen, empty. No broken windows, no open cabinets, no signs of anything being disturbed. I stood there longer than I needed to, just breathing and feeling stupid for being nervous. Eventually, I went back to bed and closed the door again, making sure it clicked into place. I locked it even though it was pointless. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling until my eyes finally got heavy. I don't know how long I slept after that, but I woke up again to a sound. It was faint at first, like something brushing against fabric. I stayed still, listening harder. The sound came again, close at this time. It was the soft scrape of something being dragged across carpet. My heart started to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared at the door. It was still closed. I hadn't heard it open. The sound continued, slow and careful, stopping for a few seconds, then starting again. Whatever it was in my apartment. I reached for my phone without taking my eyes off the door. The screen lit up my hands, shaking so badly I almost dropped it. There was no signal in my bedroom. That happened sometimes at night. I tried again anyway. Nothing. The scraping sound stopped. The silence that followed felt louder than the noise had. I sat there, frozen, my mind running through every possible explanation. Pipes, a neighbor, the building settling. None of it made sense anymore. The sound had been too deliberate, too controlled. I could hear my own breathing now, shallow and fast. The door handle moved. It didn't rattle. It didn't shake violently. It turned slowly, like someone testing it, feeling for resistance. The lock held. The handle stopped. I waited for the sound of footsteps moving away, but instead there was a soft exhale on the other side of the door. Not loud enough to be mistaken for anything else. Someone was standing right there. I pressed myself back against the headboard, my whole body buzzing with panic. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The handle turned again, harder this time. The door creaked, the wood bending slightly in its frame. Then it stopped. Seconds passed, then minutes. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the door until my eyes burned. Eventually, the pressure on the handle disappeared. I heard the faint sound of footsteps moving away, slow and heavy, heading towards the living room. I waited until my legs went numb. When I finally stood, I moved quietly, each step measured. I opened the bedroom door just enough to look out. The hallway was empty again. The lights were still on. Nothing looked different, but I could feel it. Someone had been there. Someone had stood inches from me while I sat frozen in the dark. I walked through the apartment with my phone held out in front of me, using the dim glow of the screen. The front door was unlocked. I stared at it for a long time. I always locked it, always. I checked the lock again, my hands trembling. It turned easily. Whoever had been inside hadn't forced their way in. They had used the door. That morning, after the sun came up and the world felt real again, I called the police. They walked through the apartment, calm and professional, checking windows and doors. They told me there were no signs of forced entry. No fingerprints worth collecting. No evidence of anything out of place. They asked if I might have forgotten to lock the door. I said no, but I could hear how weak that sounded. After they left, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the carpet outside my bedroom door, there were faint marks, like something heavy had been dragged across it. The fibers were bent in the wrong direction, forming a thin line that led from the hallway to the door and back again. I moved out 2 weeks later. I didn't wait for the lease to end. I didn't care about the money. I packed during the day and slept on a friend's couch at night. The last time I went back to the apartment, I stood in the empty bedroom and stared at the door, remembering the slow turn of the handle, the quiet breath on the other side. Nothing else ever happened. No break-ins. No missing items. No messages. That was what scared me the most. Whoever had been there hadn't come to steal anything. They hadn't rushed. They hadn't panicked. They had taken their time, moving slowly through my home, standing outside my door, listening to me breathe. Even now, years later, I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, heart racing, convinced I hear something moving just outside my room. I always check the lock. I always check the door. And every time I remember how easy it was for someone to walk in, stand there quietly and leave without a trace, knowing I would never be sure if it was over or if they were just waiting for another night. I was never supposed to stop there. I had been driving for hours, the kind of long drive where the road feels like it is pulling you forward and your mind goes empty. It was late, past midnight, and the highway had turned into a thin stretch of cracked asphalt cutting through nothing but trees and fields. The gas light had been on for longer than I liked, but I kept telling myself I would make it to the next exit. When the engine started to sputter, I knew I had pushed it too far. The car rolled into a rest area that looked forgotten. The sign was leaning, one corner rusted away, the letters faded like they had been baked by the sun for decades. The parking lot was wide but mostly empty, with weeds growing through the cracks. My headlights swept across picnic tables, trash bins knocked over, and a small concrete bathroom building sitting dark and silent. I parked near the edge, turned off the engine, and listened to the sudden quiet. I sat there for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel, staring at the dark windshield. The silence felt heavy, like it pressed against my ears. The air smelled old, like dust and dead leaves. I checked my phone. No signal. The battery was low, blinking red. I told myself it was fine. I only needed gas, maybe a few minutes of rest. I stepped out of the car and felt the cold hit my face. The wind moved through the trees behind the rest area, making a low, steady sound that never stopped. I opened the trunk to look for the gas I thought I had. It was not there. Just a spare tire, some old tools, and a blanket. I closed it slowly, the sound echoing louder than it should have. That was when I noticed something off. There were tire tracks in the dirt near the edge of the lot, fresh ones, darker than the others. They did not look like they belonged to someone passing through. They looked like someone had driven in circles, back and forth, like they had waited there for a while. I tried to shake the feeling. I walked toward the bathroom building, my footsteps loud on the concrete. The door was slightly open, hanging crooked on one hinge. Inside, the smell was sharp and rotten. The lights did not work. Moonlight came in through a broken window, showing cracked sinks and graffiti on the walls. The floor was wet in places, but I could not tell why. I used the bathroom quickly, my heart beating faster the longer I stayed inside. When I stepped back out, I felt it right away. That sense that someone else was there. The parking lot looked the same, but the air felt different, tighter. I looked around, scanning the shadows between the trees. Nothing moved. Still, the feeling did not go away. I walked back to my car faster than before and locked the doors as soon as I got in. The click of the locks gave me a small sense of relief. I leaned back in the seat and tried to think clearly. It could wait until morning. Someone would come eventually. You could trucks, travelers, anyone. I pulled the blanket from the back seat and wrapped it around myself. The car felt small, like it was shrinking. Every sound outside felt closer than it should have been. To wind. A branch snapping. Something scraping across the pavement far away. Time passed slowly. My phone died. The dashboard clock stopped working. I had no idea how long I had been there when I saw the headlights. They came from the far end of the lot, slow and careful, not like someone just pulling in for a quick stop. The lights moved, then stopped. An engine idled, low and rough. I stayed still, watching through the side mirror. A truck sat there, old and dark, its paint hard to see. The headlights stayed on, pointed slightly away from me. No one got out. The engine kept running. Minutes passed like that. I told myself it was another traveler, someone resting. Still, they did not turn off the engine. They did not move. The driver's side door of my car suddenly felt too close. I slid over to the passenger seat without thinking, keeping my movements slow. I lowered myself so my head was barely above the window line. My breathing sounded too loud in my ears. Outside, the truck's engine cut off. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I saw movement then. A shape stepping out of the truck. Tall, slow, deliberate. The figure stood there for a moment, then started walking across the lot. Not towards the bathrooms, toward the trees, toward my car. The footsteps were quiet, but I could feel them somehow, like vibrations through the ground. I stayed frozen, my muscles tight, my legs starting to ache. The figure stopped somewhere I could not see. I waited for the sound of footsteps again. Instead, I heard something else. The soft crunch of gravel close to my car. A shadow passed over the hood, blocking the moonlight for a second. I closed my eyes without meaning to. Something touched the car. Fingers dragging slowly along the metal, starting near the trunk and moving forward. The sound was gentle but clear, like someone taking their time. I pressed my hand over my mouth, afraid even the sound of breathing would give me away. The fingers stopped near the driver's door. There was a pause.
then the handle moved. The door was locked. The handle rattled once, then again, harder. The car shook slightly. I stayed where I was, my body screaming at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The handle stopped moving. I waited for the next sound. Seconds passed, maybe minutes. He could not tell. The shadow moved away. I heard footsteps again, farther this time. I lifted my head just enough to see the figure walking back towards the truck. My heart did not slow down. I watched as the truck door opened and closed. The engine started. The headlights turned towards me for a brief moment, flooding the inside of my car with harsh white light. I turned my face away, sure that was the end. But the truck did not come closer. It backed up, turned, and drove out of the rest area, disappearing down the dark road. The red taillights faded until they were gone completely. I stayed still long after that, afraid it was a trick, afraid the truck would come back. Eventually, the sky began to lighten. The black turned to dark blue, then gray. Birds started making noise in the trees. My body felt stiff and sore, like I had not moved in days. When the sun finally rose, a highway patrol car pulled into the rest area. The sight of it broke something in me.
I got out of the car on shaking legs and waved my arms until the officer saw me. Later, after gas and sleep and daylight made everything feel less sharp, I thought about that night again. I thought about the fresh tire tracks, the waiting truck, the slow fingers on the car. Nothing supernatural had happened. No monsters, no ghosts, just a person alone in the dark, choosing to scare or hurt someone who could not run. I never stop at places like that anymore. If my gas light comes on, I slow down. I plan ahead, because some places are not empty just because they look that way. And sometimes the scariest thing is knowing that what found you was completely real, and that you were only saved because it decided to leave. I still remember that night because it was the first time I truly understood how fast normal life can fall apart without warning. Nothing strange was supposed to happen. It was just another shift, another boring routine that I had done so many times that my body could run on autopilot. That routine is the reason I survived, and it is also the reason I will never do that job again. I was working overnight inventory checks at a large self-storage facility on the edge of town. The place was massive, rows and rows of metal units stacked like long gray hallways with only a few flickering lights mounted high on poles. During the day, the place was busy and loud, full of moving trucks and people arguing with locks that would not open. At night, it turned into something else entirely. The air felt thicker. Every sound carried too far. Even my own footsteps sounded wrong. My job was simple. Walk the grounds every hour, check for open units, broken locks, or signs of someone staying inside. I had a clipboard, a flashlight, and a small radio that barely worked. No weapon, no backup. I never thought I needed one. Nothing had ever happened before. That night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that sneaks into your clothes and settles into your bones. I pulled my jacket tighter and started my first round just after midnight. The sky was clear, no moon, just dark space above me. The lights buzzed quietly, some brighter than others, some barely working at all. The storage units stretched so far that the end of each row faded into black. At first, everything felt normal. Locks were in place, doors were shut, no movement. Just the sound of distant traffic and the wind brushing against the metal walls. I marked off each section and kept walking. I remember feeling tired but calm, already thinking about the coffee I would make when I got back to the office. Halfway through the second row, I noticed something small that felt wrong. One unit door was slightly raised, no more than a few inches off the ground. It could have been a mistake, or someone rushing earlier that day. I crouched and shined my flashlight underneath. I expected to see boxes or furniture. Instead, I saw nothing but darkness and a faint drag mark in the dust. The mark looked fresh. I stood up slowly and scanned the row. Nothing moved, no sound. I told myself not to overthink it. I wrote it down and continued, planning to report it later. Still, my chest felt tight, like I had just missed something important. As I walked deeper into the facility, the lights became more spread out. The shadows between units grew longer and darker. Every step echoed. I became more aware of my breathing, how loud it sounded in my ears. I kept checking behind me, even though I told myself there was no reason to. That was when I heard it. Tuck, not footsteps, not voices. It was the sound of metal lightly tapping metal, slow and uneven. It came from somewhere behind the rows, not close enough to pinpoint. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I stood still for a full minute, listening. Nothing. I told myself it was the wind or a loose door. I forced my legs to move again, but my pace was slower now. As I turned into another row, I felt it before I saw it. A pressure, like someone was nearby without being visible. My flashlight beam shook slightly as I swept it across the units. Then the light caught something low to the ground near the end of the row. A shape moved. It was fast, pulling back into the shadow before I could see details. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. I froze, every nerve screaming at me to run, but my feet stayed planted. I told myself it was an animal. That made sense. It had to be an animal. But animals make noise. I backed up slowly, keeping the light pointed forward. The rows felt tighter now, like the walls were closing in. I took another step back and felt my heel scrape against something soft. I looked down and saw a blanket crumpled near the base of a unit, dirty and damp. Someone had been sleeping there. The realization hit me hot. This was not just trespassing. Someone had been living here, hiding, watching. I felt exposed standing in the open aisle with nowhere to go. I turned and started walking faster toward the main office, trying not to break into a run. That was when the tapping sound came back, closer this time. It followed my movement, stopping when I stopped, starting when I moved. I did not look back. I could feel eyes on me, heavy and focused. My radio crackled suddenly, loud in the silence, making me flinch. I grabbed it, pressing the button, but only static came out. I released it and shoved it back into my pocket, my hands shaking. I reached a stretch where the lights were completely out, just a long dark path between rows. I hesitated for a moment, then stepped into it. My flashlight beam felt weak, swallowed by the darkness ahead. My breathing turned shallow. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold. Halfway through, I heard movement directly behind me, not tapping this time. Soft, deliberate steps. I could hear the scrape of shoes against concrete. They were close enough that I knew running was my only option. I ran. The sound behind me changed instantly, matching my pace. I did not look back. I focused on the faint glow of the office building in the distance. My lungs burned. My legs felt heavily. I dropped my clipboard without noticing. I burst into the light near the office and spun around. The rows behind me were empty. No movement, no sound, just shadows and metal doors.
I slammed the office door shut and locked it, my hands barely working.
He stood there for a long time, leaning against the wall, listening. Nothing followed me inside. When my breathing finally slowed, I checked the security cameras. Most of them were old and grainy, but they showed enough. I rewound the footage from the dark rows. I saw myself walking. I saw the flashlight moving. Then, several seconds after I passed, a figure stepped out from between the units. An adult, thin, dirty, moving slowly, calmly, watching me, staying just out of the light. The figure followed me through multiple rows, always keeping distance, always hiding when I stopped. When I ran, it ran too. I watched the footage until I reached the office, until the figure stopped at the edge of the light and stood there, staring at the building for a long time before turning away. I called the police and stayed locked inside until morning. They searched the facility and found multiple units forced open from the inside. Food wrappers, clothing, tools. A place in Thogers matchdes, mekuft visi edge at the top, a makeshift bed. They never found the person. I quit the next day. Even now, months later, I still think about how close that figure stayed without ever touching me, how quiet they were, how patient. I know one thing for sure. If I had stopped running, if I had turned around in that dark row, this would not be a story I could tell. I was not supposed to be there that late. The storage place usually closed before dark, and I knew that. I had told myself I would be quick. I only needed to move a few boxes, grab an old suitcase, and leave. The place was cheap, on the edge of an industrial area, surrounded by empty lots and half-broken streetlights. During the day it looked boring and harmless. At night it felt like something else. The air inside the storage building was thick and stale. It smelled like dust, oil, and old cardboard. The lights were long fluorescent tubes that buzzed softly and flickered just enough to make everything feel unstable. My footsteps echoed down the narrow hallway between metal doors. Each unit looked the same, gray and dented, with scratched locks and faded numbers painted above them. I remember thinking how easy it would be to lose track of where I was if the lights went out. My unit was near the back, close to a corner where the ceiling dipped lower and the air felt cooler. I rolled up the metal door and started pulling boxes out one by one. Old clothes, broken electronics, things I had not touched in years. Dust stuck to my hands and arms. My phone was in my pocket, but I did not check it. I did not feel the time passing. I was focused on getting it done so I could leave. At some point, I noticed how quiet it had become. Not the normal quiet, but the kind where even the buzzing lights seemed distant. I realized the main entrance door must have closed. I walked back toward the front of the building carrying a box, and that was when I saw the lights near the entrance were off. Only the emergency lights were on, dim and yellow, barely lighting the floor. I felt a tight feeling in my chest. I dropped the box and walked faster. When I reached the main door, I tried the handle. It did not move. I tried again, harder. Nothing. The door was locked from the outside. The place had closed, and I was still inside. I stood there for a moment, breathing slowly, telling myself it was not a big deal. Someone would open it in the morning. I had my phone. I could call for help. I pulled it out and saw there was no signal. The building was too thick, too far from the road. I tried moving around, holding the phone up, walking back and forth, but the screen stayed empty. The emergency lights cast long shadows that stretched and shifted as I moved. The building felt bigger now, like it had expanded. Every sound I made felt loud. My breathing, my shoes scraping the floor, the soft click of the phone screen locking. I started walking back toward my unit, planning to sit and wait it out. That was when I heard something that did not come from me. It was a sound like metal rubbing against metal, slow and uneven. It came from somewhere deeper in the rows of units. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. The silence that followed felt heavy, like pressure in my ears. I told myself it was the building settling or the air system turning on and off. Old places made noises. I kept walking, slower now, paying attention to every detail. The lights flickered again. One of them went out completely, leaving a section of hallway in darkness. I did not like how much space the darkness took up. As I passed another row, I saw that one of the storage doors was slightly open. I was sure it had been closed earlier. The gap was small, just enough to notice. Inside, it was dark. The metal door creaked slightly as the air moved. I felt a cold wave run through me, starting at my neck and moving down my back. I kept walking. I did not look inside. The sound came back, closer this time. Footsteps. Slow, careful steps, not rushed, not heavy. They stopped when I stopped. My heart started beating harder, and I could feel it in my throat. I stood still, listening. The emergency light above me flickered, then steadied. I moved again, and the footsteps moved too. There was no reason anyone else should be there. The place was closed. The gate outside was locked. I knew that. I tried to think of logical reasons, but none of them made sense. The feeling that I was not alone became stronger with every step. I turned down another hallway, hoping to lose whatever was behind me. The rows of units went on and on, all looking the same. My sense of direction was gone. The air felt colder, heavier. I could smell something damp now, like wet concrete. Somewhere, water was dripping, slow and steady. I reached my unit again by accident. The meter door was still open. I rolled it down part of the way, leaving a gap at the bottom, and sat inside among the boxes. My hands were shaking. I tried to slow my breathing, to stay quiet. The darkness inside the unit wrapped around me, broken only by thin lines of light coming through the cracks. The footsteps came closer. I could tell they were in the same hallway now. They moved slowly, stopping often, like whoever it was listening.
He pressed myself against the back wall, barely breathing. Dust filled my nose and throat, but I did not move. A shadow passed in front of the gap under the door. It blocked the light for a moment, then moved on. The footsteps continued past my unit, then stopped again. I waited. My legs started to ache from staying still. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, useless without a signal. Time stretched out in a way that did not feel real. My minutes felt like hours. My mind jumped between panic and numbness. I thought about the boxes around me, about how easy it would be to hide something in a place like this and never be found. The thought made my stomach turn. The dripping sound grew louder. I realized water was spreading across the floor outside my unit. The building had a drainage problem. Rain must have started outside, and the water was finding its way in. The smell of damp concrete was stronger now. The water crept closer to the unit, soaking into the cardboard boxes near the entrance. The footsteps returned, faster this time. They moved back and forth in front of my unit, stopping, starting, like the person was unsure. The shadow appeared again, lingering longer. I felt certain they knew I was there. Then the metal door of a nearby unit slammed shut.
The sound echoed through the building, sharp and violent. I flinched, biting down on my lip to keep from making noise. After that, everything went quiet again. I do not know how long I stayed there. My body was stiff, my mind exhausted. At some point the water stopped rising. The dripping slowed. The footsteps did not come back. When the sky outside finally started to lighten, the emergency lights shut off one by one, and the main lights flickered back on. The sudden brightness hurt my eyes. I waited a little longer, making sure the building was truly empty. I rolled up the door and stepped out. The floor was wet, reflecting the lights. Several units along the hallway were open now, their doors bent or scratched. One of them had dark stains on the floor leading inside, not from water. I did not go near it. I walked to the front entrance and waited. When the door finally unlocked and opened, I walked out without looking back. I did not tell anyone what happened. I emptied the unit later that week, during the day, with other people around.
I still think about that night. I still think about how normal it started, how easily it could have ended differently.
Storage places look simple, harmless, full of forgotten things. Now I know how wrong that feeling can be. I never go back alone, and I never stay late anymore. Some spaces are not meant to be empty, and some are not meant to be entered when the lights go out. I was driving home from a night shift I had picked up last minute, the kind of shift you regret agreeing to halfway through but force yourself to finish because the money feels necessary at the time. It was a warehouse job on the edge of town, far from anything familiar. By the time I clocked out, my body felt heavy and slow, like every movement had a delay. The parking lot was empty except for my car and one other vehicle parked way too far from the building to make sense. The lights buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to be annoying. I remember noticing how quiet everything felt. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind where you realize how loud your own breathing is. The drive home took me through a long stretch of road that cut between farmland and patches of trees. No streetlights, no houses, no stores. Just pavement, darkness, and the occasional reflective sign. I rolled the window down a bit to keep myself awake. The air was cold and smelled damp, like soil and old leaves. My headlights felt weak against the dark, like they were being swallowed instead of lighting anything up. Every few minutes I checked the dashboard clock, feeling irritated that time seemed to move slower than it should. About 20 minutes in, I noticed headlights behind me. That wasn't strange by itself, but what stood out was how long they stayed there. Same distance, same speed, no attempt to pass even though the road was straight and empty. I told myself it didn't matter. People drive like that all the time. Still, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. The lights were older, yellowish, not the bright white you see on newer cars. They bounced slightly, like the suspension was worn out. A few miles later, I took a turn onto a narrower road, one I didn't usually use, but that shaved a few minutes off the drive. The headlights followed me. That was when I felt the first real knot in my stomach. I tried to reason it away. It could be someone who lived out there. It could be coincidence. I focused on the road, noticing cracks in the asphalt, weeds growing through the edges, the way the trees leaned inward like they were closing off the sky. The road went on longer than I remembered. My phone had no signal out there, which wasn't unusual, but it suddenly felt important. I sped up a little, just enough to test it. The headlights behind me matched my speed. I slowed down. They slowed down. My mouth felt dry. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, a steady thump that didn't match the calm I was trying to fake. I reached a section where the road dipped and curved through a wooded area. My headlights swept across tree trunks, dead branches, and piles of leaves that looked like shapes for half a second before turning back into nothing. That was when the car behind me got closer. Not dangerously close, but close enough that I could see the outline of the hood now, not just the lights. It was an older sedan, dark-colored, with a dented front bumper. One headlight flickered occasionally. I thought about turning around, but there was nowhere safe to do it. No driveways, no wide shoulders, just trees and darkness. I pressed the accelerator harder. My engine whined in response. The car behind me followed, staying right there. The fear shifted from a dull background feeling to something sharp and physical. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, my shoulders stiff, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. The road suddenly ended at a T intersection. I hadn't remembered that part at all. I slowed down, heart racing, and turned right without thinking too much about it. The headlights followed again. This new road was even worse, gravel instead of pavement. The sound of rocks hitting the underside of my car was loud in the quiet night. Dust rose up and hung in the air, visible in my headlights like fog. A few minutes down that road, my car hit a deep pothole. There was a loud crack, followed by a horrible dragging sound. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. I pulled over, panic flooding my chest. The engine still ran, but the car felt wrong, unbalanced. I got out, the cold air hitting me hard. The smell of dust and oil filled my nose. My front tire was completely shredded, rubber peeled back like skin. The rim was bent. I looked back down the road. The other car had stopped about 50 yards away. Its engine stayed running. The headlights stayed on. No one got out. The silence between us felt thick and heavy. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing through possibilities. I knew I should get back in my car, but part of me didn't want to be trapped inside it. After a few seconds that felt way longer, the other car started moving again. Slowly, gravel crunched under its tires. It rolled past me, not speeding, not stopping, just passing. As it went by, I caught a glimpse through the driver's window. The interior light was on. The driver was a man, middle-aged, unshaven, staring straight ahead with an empty expression. He didn't look at me. There was no emotion on his face at all. The car disappeared into the dark, its taillights shrinking until they were gone. I stood there for a long moment, listening. When the sound faded completely, the quiet felt even louder than before. My legs felt weak. I got back into my car and locked the doors, even though I knew it wouldn't help much. I tried calling for help, but my phone still had no signal. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself the man had just been a random driver, that I was overreacting.
Still, my hands shook. I turned off the engine to save what little battery I had left. The darkness closed in immediately. Without headlights, the world outside my car didn't exist. I sat there for what must have been over an hour. I didn't sleep. Every sound made me tense.
Wind moving through the trees. Something small running across the gravel. My own breathing. At some point, distant headlights appeared again, far down the road. Relief washed over me, so hot it almost made me dizzy. I flashed my lights, even though my battery was low. The vehicle slowed and stopped near me. This time it was a tow truck from a nearby town, probably heading home after a long night. The driver changed my tire without much trouble. I didn't tell him about the other car. I just wanted to leave that road as fast as possible. When I finally got home, the sky was starting to lighten. I sat in my driveway for a while, engine off, listening to the normal morning sounds. Birds, distant traffic, life continuing like nothing had happened. I went inside and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw those headlights in my mirror, steady and patient. A few days later, I checked the local news online. There was a short article buried near the bottom of the page. It mentioned an unsolved case from years ago. Several people had reported being followed late at night on rural roads by an older sedan, matching the same description. In 2 cases, the drivers' cars had broken down. They were found days later, abandoned, with no sign of what happened to the people. I stared at the screen for a long time, my stomach sinking. The road name was the same one I had turned on to that night. I closed the page and sat there in silence. Nothing had happened to me in the end. I made it home. I was safe.
but I knew how close I had come to something I didn't understand and didn't want to. Even now, I avoid driving at night when I can, and when I do, I never take shortcuts anymore, no matter how tired I am.